Before we get into the episode, I want to briefly talk about the upcoming immersive study program I've put together for this October in Egypt. It's called Techniques of Graeco-Egyptian Theurgy, and it's a 9-day field immersive excursion through Egypt, October 18th to the 26th. In partnership with Argos Destinations, I'll be taking 16 attendees across Egypt and teaching them the history, theory, and practice of theurgic applications of ceremonial magic. We will be on site with private access to some of the most incredible sites of the ancient world, including the temple complex at Dendera, the Osirian at Abydos, the sanctuary of Sekhmet at Karnak, and a private stay on King's Island in the middle of the Nile to learn and practice ceremonial, magical techniques reconstructed from sources such as the Greek magical papyri, the fragments of the Chaldean oracles, De Mysteries by Iamblichus, and over 60 other source materials and texts. But more than a mere group educational excursion, I've curated and constructed this material to act as a personal initiatory journey for each participant. This is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip. To view the full itinerary and register, see the links in the About section of this video. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Egypt, in Luke's. My conversation today is with author, astrologer, alchemist, and founder and director of studies for the Institute of Hermetic Studies, Mark Stavish. One of Mark's chief concerns and messages has been sustainability in esoteric communities, an often neglected consideration. The Institute for Hermetic Studies has taken an initiative towards the preservation of significant literature in esotericism, resulting in the establishment of the Institute for Hermetic Studies collection at the Weinberg Memorial Library on the campus of the University of Scranton. Among items in this collection included are books, monographs, publications, lectures, and ephemera from a variety of esoteric, religious, and consciousness studies movements of the 20th century and earlier, with each item listed in an online database. IHS also works towards sustainability by offering online courses through Teachable, publishing their popular monograph series, and offering a comprehensive teacher training program. Mark and I sat down to discuss future sustainability for communities in esotericism and the realities of administration, leadership, publishing, and preparation for the unfolding changing of the guard and globally shifting paradigms. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Stavish, I got you back on with me today on the Arcanum Podcast. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and an absolute honor to talk to you. Thank you for being here, man.
Oh, thank you so very much for the invitation. It is deeply appreciated. And just to let you know, some of our volunteers have twisted my arm sufficiently to get the information out to them so that we have a wiki page for the Institute for Hermetic Studies. And you are listed as among the presenters at our conference. So we've got you and Arcanum Podcast front and center. So hopefully we're going to have a live link in there to these different mentions, but also to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and IHS is doing a lot. They're doing a lot of really good work. You guys are really making a push right now, and it's interesting because the topic of our discussion for this evening is sustainability, and you guys are really taking initiative, and you have been. But there's a few, we're going to talk about some current events, and we're going to talk about some of the state of our communities in esotericism and alchemy, astrology, etc. IHS being a staple of these communities now for decades. But sustainability, man, what in terms of, you guys now have the IHS collection. It's almost prescient given the recent events, the fires out in California and Southern California and things of this nature. I was discussing it with a few brothers across the country. We're on a group chat, and I mentioned about how we lost the Theosophical Society, and one of the brothers actually responded, this makes me really appreciate even more what IHS is doing with the collection. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I don't know if I mentioned on our last talk, but I know I've mentioned on a few other interviews. One of the things that has brought us to the current state with the collection is just that. It's sustainability. It's long term. When we look at what has and who, because it's not a what, it's a who, the people. People are the resource that make things happen. That needs to be understood. People are both the problem and the solution. um, I was saying to some of our board members and to other folks, well, we have to look at what we're going to be doing with a lot of this information and this material, because otherwise, uh, some of it will survive and some of it's going to get sold off at an estate sale when I'm dead. Now, that's the reality of it. We've seen it time and time again. So, how do we manage this as a viable collection of important materials that were put together for a purpose that have been used over the decades to ensure that it survives more decades? And we looked to different organizations locally that we could work with. And while several were interested, we found they fell into two categories. Those who had the interest but not the resources, okay, or those who had the resources sort of, but not necessarily the interest. And usually between both of those, when you looked at what was their financial stability, it wasn't there. We came very close to several very good, what appeared on paper to be very good agreements, but fortunately they never materialized, or I should say unfortunately, for the organizations involved, because we could have helped them a great deal. But their financial status was such that we had to sit down and say, well, where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 10? We're going to be in 2030. That's what sustainability means. It means long term, short, medium, long term. And we are looking at well-known, well-established organizations that through their own mismanagement over the decades were no longer financially viable. And that's what it just came down to. So we had very few choices. So many people would think, well, why don't you just contact the library or university? Well, most of them don't want it. This is hard for people to understand in this field. It's a burden and a responsibility. It takes money to do these things. I'm going to be saying that word over and over and over again. It takes money to do these things. So when you look at a collection and you're putting it on shelves somewhere, that also means maintenance and supervision and protection. So that means you're going to be looking at universities mostly. Rarely are you going to look at a college. There might be a college, there might be, but mostly it's universities. And then you have to make sure that those books don't get, end up getting sold on the used book sale for $1 a piece. When the library decides to clean its shelves off, you have to have arrangements with them and understanding of what the collection constitutes and what is going to happen. So we were looking at, in the region, in terms of the region where we're at, 3 possibilities, and really only 2 of them as far as I was concerned. So I wrote an incredible ask letter. I mean, it was just a work of art, okay? And I sent it out to the directors of special collections at 2 universities. I knew that one of them would say, thank you, no thank you. And that was the one I wanted, but I knew they didn't have the space for it. But I thought, we'll give it a shot, right? Mm-hmm. You got to ask.
Absolutely.
And this is an important message for folks listening. You have to ask about things. I tell my sons that all the time. Just go ask. Yeah. If you hear no, then you know for certain and you move on, but there's no wondering. Mm-hmm. And we did hear back then from the University of Scranton, and the University of Scranton very quickly responded. Their director of special collections, their director of the library, came and visited me. We discussed things. I showed them various things that we have and other things who were in storage. They just didn't even know where to look. They were just in awe. And I said, and that doesn't include, if you're lucky, the 3,000 volumes on Tibetan Buddhism.
Wow.
And I said, this is just Western esotericism. And they just like, what? We said. So we came to an arrangement, an agreement, in which we will make available some materials. And here's the reason, people say, why are you raising money? I said, because if we don't raise money, then we have nothing left. We can't just give $60,000 to $80,000 worth of books away.
Mm-hmm.
We have to find a way to continue to finance the future.
Right.
You have to keep financing the future. And we're not looking for $60,000 to $80,000, by the way. That's not what we're after. But that's what we're looking at in terms of value. Now, one of the reasons this happened is because over the last few months, there's been an interest in esotericism that there wasn't before. And some collectors, that is institutional collectors, I need to make that clear, institutional collectors, but these are mostly private collectors, are vacuuming up a lot of the material. So we could have sold it off, by the way, at at a prime price. But then no one would ever have seen it. It would have gone into private collection, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean books that were released in 2017. Some of them are, because occult books, books on esotericism, they go out of print pretty quickly. And with most publishing companies, there are some that there's very few that keep it in continuous print. But there are books that I bought in 2017 that I'm recommending to people, and they're like, "Why are you recommending a $600 book to me?" Like, well, I got it for $20, just a few years ago.
Right. And that leads us to one of the problems that we have when we talk about sustainability. Back in the old days, the mantra or slogan of many of these esoteric groups was perfect, peace, profound. The 3 Ps, perfect, peace, profound. What we've managed to do is we've replaced that with podcasts, publishing, and products. And the problem there is that while we have a tremendous amount of interesting podcasts, such as yours, and we have some interesting publishing, although a lot of it is this gourmet publishing, which really does not add value.
Mm-hmm.
It adds some interesting ideas, but it's not, and they're beautiful, often books at times, but it's not a path. And this is where I'm going. And the same thing with product. While we see more of the occult in popular culture or occulture, this is not a sustainable path. I come to your podcast for information, but it's not a path.
Right.
Now, what you're going to be teaching, by the way, on your trip to Egypt, that's a path.
Right. Well, I like to have a little bit of both, because that's how you get, for me, the plan was always to bring some more of the people that talk about paths
Yes.
back into the dialogue, back front and center. I hyper specialize in this kind of stuff where I'll talk to mostly practitioners or academics that practitioners can utilize in their practicum, their praxis, But what I see happening, especially being almost 40 now, and so that puts me, I'm a millennial, but I came up just to the tail end of where punk rock started really commercializing. And I'm a musician, I've been a musician since I was 12 years old. I hit the road when I was 15. I'm constantly referring things back to those analogies, those early life lessons, and I'm seeing a similar, it feels like it felt back then. This kind of thing is becoming highly, highly commoditized, highly, highly trendy. And the things that you're talking about, the boutique works that give you no practicum, but almost read like some stream of consciousness, somebody's diary. It's like a $300 to read my diary.
Yeah.
It's
where can we get some of that? Let's work on that one.
Right. It's just trendy, and you're right. It's not sustainable because it's going to wash the community out. That's the whole danger of profanation, right? Meaning casting pearls outside of the temple. is that you're taking something that has an inherent sort of numinosity, a numinous nature, and as soon as you expose that to the harsh light of the mainstream, it calluses over. And that's just like this compounding callus that just buries the essence 6 miles beneath the crust of the earth. So it's I don't know. Some people might think that that's part of a natural process, but
Just to dovetail into what you said, uh, John White, who gave a fantastic class on New Thought and did a presentation on Theurgy at the IHS conference. He spoke about the role of virtues, and we've talked about virtues, and virtues are that aspect of classical theurgy and the tree of life that are really ignored in modern esotericism. Virtue is a virility. It is the force of life. It is a accomplishment. It is a what is the word I'm looking for in the New Testament? It is the power of blessing realizing itself. What you would see in Tantra as a siddha, a siddhi. It's a siddhi. It's an accomplishment. It is a realization of a potentiality, which is itself a power. And the first virtue on the path is discrimination. And discrimination means you know the option or the choices of this or that. You have a sense of karma or cause and effect. What will happen if you choose this or that? There's a certain level of awareness of actions have consequences and what those consequences might be. We're seeing a tremendous lack of that discriminatory faculty. Now, we can make a fairly decent argument for keeping the portal open a little bit so that people can come in. There'll be a certain natural filtering effect, but not always. And, sometimes if you don't guard well that western gate, you can get a force of disruption in there that can be very hard to undo. So we always have to be very careful with the processes of how we do things in terms of instruction. Now, being that the Institute for Hermetic Studies does not do initiatic activity and teaches its courses more like a college, we don't have that problem as much. People just wash out on their own. We don't have to deal with them if they become a problem in a ritual. But in a ritualized setting, this is a serious issue. There has to be harmony. Harmony is not a false word. It's not an empty promise. Again, harmony is a virtue. It is the inner quality or power that creates the psychic dimension that exists within that temple. And that's what allows you to experience those energies of Tiferet, or not if you don't have it. So you have to have that potential for harmony, even if briefly. Okay. We don't, we're here as students learning. We don't expect people to be there all the time, just to strive to be there, to make the effort. So that said, I just want to bring that to what you were saying, So when we look at sustainability, we see in this notion of publishing, this notion of the solo practitioner a lot. And we tend to forget that historically solo practitioners didn't exist on their own. They existed as after having gone through some level of education or training elsewhere. You go to high school, you go to college, you go to graduate school or medical school, you do some kind of internships, and then finally you get to hang out your shingle as a licensed physician or practitioner, what have you. So we have this false notion, and what happens there is if there's no one to check you, that is either someone who's basically you've made an agreement with, so you're being held responsible to your end of the agreement, whether it's just in paying your dues and sweeping the temple floor, or whether it's in how you behave around others, then how are you going to check yourself? Most people don't have that capacity. If they did, the world would be a tremendously better place. And if you think I'm wrong, just ask yourself how you were behaving in traffic yesterday. Now, there's a perfect example. How were you behaving in traffic? How are you behaving in the checkout line? What were your thoughts when you heard about the fires in California? And the first words of that, it was rich people's houses that burned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have to look at sustainability in terms of within our own lifetime of year to year, month to month, day to day, and then, of course, decade to decade. So that becomes intergenerational because we got this from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
We're caretakers of it. We're responsible for making sure that it's there in the future for other people. And really, I hear all these people talking about reincarnation and they believe in reincarnation. They keep asking about past lives. Well, what about your future life? What are you building for your future? If there's no sustainability, where are you going to learn this stuff?
Mm-hmm. I mean, and not only that, you talked about virtue and harmonia, harmony. And every time I fail in a virtue, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking about what am I doing? People say sometimes, and again, this is a lesson I learned the hard way, but people say, what are you doing now that you're going to be kicking yourself in the ass for in 10 years? What am I doing now that I'm going to be kicking myself in the ass for in 100 years, 200 years?
Well, that's the real question. And what we see here is just things came so easy over the last 25 years, 30 years really, but 25 in particular, that the idea that you just can't get stuff on Zoom, the idea that you just can't get a PDF, the idea that you can't just order it off Amazon isn't even in the framework now of about 2 generations. So the idea that it won't be there in the future is also not in their framework. They're laboring under delusions of permanence. When we look to this and we say, what are my goals here? What am I really after? When it becomes a form of entertainment without accountability, then that's what it becomes. And the idea of building something for the future isn't necessary because it's just, it's gourmet publishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's gourmet this, it's gourmet that. It's my spectacular new tattoo or piece of jewelry.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot with very good, well-intended people, not just fools, but well-intended people too, constantly posting on social media, videos of their alchemical work or of that. And there's one or two who I make an exception for because they do it with instruction and they do it with, once it's completed. But generally speaking, the idea of posting images of your alchemical work or your magical talismans or your new stuff violates the fundamental rule of silence.
Yeah. Break the alembic.
Yeah, yeah. You're constantly letting new psychic energies into your personal domain. Well, why? Because it's attention-seeking behavior,
Mhm.
which is
Absolutely.
which is counterproductive to the goal. But you see, that's because there aren't good examples. And there aren't good examples because there aren't strong institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And there can only be strong institutions if you have strong practitioners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
This
I think
isn't rocket science.
one of the weakest links also just is the general attitude of the individual practitioner has, I think, certainly changed over the last 20 years. And not to get too psychological, but I think that there is a fair amount of unconscious postmodernist bias in the way that we're attempting to filter this stuff. I view it almost as this like factory installed software Uh, it's that it's perceptual software that we're constantly running, and we're not aware because it's right. It just came with the hardware almost. And I think one of the boons of going through an initiatic system and having good teachers, and you have some bad teachers, and that's life. Not everything has to traumatize you. Yeah, I think that mindset of like, well, this person could hurt me. Well, then you'll never leave your house. You'll never learn anything. You'll never do anything. And I'll tell you one thing right now, it ain't on the internet. I'm not talking about the things I'm doing now. I'm talking about the things that I can talk about without violating my oath and potentially throwing people into waters they're not ready to swim in. The stuff that I talk about, I was working on 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's done already. It's finished. That cake was baked and eaten. It's that's turkey leftovers that are getting thrown out there. It's not the same as what you're working on now. Yeah.
You can't talk about it. You violate the hermetic seal that's supposed to be on it, and it just truly like you may use that cake analogy. It's true. If you crack that oven open too quickly, it just doesn't rise or it caves in. It's the same thing with this work.
Well, this comes down to, again, what are the examples that people have? I was very fortunate when I grew up around good examples of people. Were they adepts? Maybe, maybe not, but they were good examples of practitioners. And some of them were quite accomplished, by the way. And they're quite accomplished in all areas of life. So having been able to see what an accomplished practitioner looks like when an accomplished person, we have again the notion of the role model. And a role model is simply another way of saying a God form, an archetype. Because they embody it. They're the embodiment of the archetype right there and living, without having to tell you. So we have to, again, go back to what type of people are we creating with our systems, with our instruction? And I tend to side with Vivekananda and some others. There's no place for weakness. Weakness is not a virtue. There's too much that we have to deal with that, is just difficult. If you seek to become an adept, you're saying you seek to have knowledge of the universe. That's a tremendous burden and tremendous revelation. How can that be for anyone who's weak? And of course, it happens in stages. We know that, but so does the growth of strength happens in stages. It doesn't happen all at once. And that's really what we're saying. How do we understand what it is we're doing? How do we understand the qualities that we need to bring to this? And with that said, sustainability is just that. Sustainability is strength. It's vision. It's capacity. It's a recognition that what I do not accomplish now, I will want to accomplish later. And this is the mechanism I provide for myself and others so that I can accomplish that.
Yeah.
That has to be the discussion, because back in the old days, why do you wish to learn in order to serve? How many people get asked if they want to serve anymore? And then often when you tell them, we need some service here, everyone immediately becomes an MD. And I don't mean a medical doctor. I mean a minimum donor. Okay, what's the least I can do? It's like teaching in high school or undergraduate freshman again. What's the minimum amount I can do to get maximum grade? Where's AI going to come in and save me on this? Well,
Yeah.
it's not. And I think that we have to be more honest in the beginning, early on, with potential students. I mean, I don't have to as much. They hear me talking, and this kind of is the way. But I think for organizations are tough because they need money to survive. They need resources. And a lot of them that I've talked to, they don't have the skills. They don't even understand it. They don't even understand they need resources. They don't have the skills to acquire them. They don't even know what an endowment is. and how to do one.
Mm.
So the real life skills of running an organization that you often see in Masonic lodges, successful, and Masonic lodges have them. Masonic lodges that are unsuccessful, meaning those that are folding now, they fold because they don't have them.
Mhm.
It's pretty straight up, and we've seen it. You and I, we've seen it very up close and personal.
Mhm.
Um, so we have to look at what is the skill training that we're looking at for these candidates so that this is more than just a memorization of symbols and rituals. Because if you do that too much, and this is where, I've gotten in trouble in the past by, making fun of the Golden Dawn for it, only because it's easy, it's something people recognize, but you can look around and see a lot of other examples of it. You
Uh,
know, it's just that it's very evident when you open up like one of the big books, one of the big bricks, that's why I use this one. But too much emphasis on symbolism and too much emphasis on ritual without an understanding of how that really interconnects to your daily life creates a psychic barrier, not a psychic conduit. It creates more friction and not in a healthy way, but it creates a kind of partial psychosis
yes. Oh my God, yes.
where you're really stuck in this kind of dream world. And it's not dreamy, it's just you're constantly running these symbols through your head. And this is where I've often said I did that presentation on Saturday, Pluto and Aquarius. What was it? Predictions for the next 25 years or something like that. And I said, when you look at different forms of prediction or prophecy, in my mind,
Mhm.
the only one that is really reliable is astrology. And the reason for that is simple. It's very, very simple. I can take a chart and I know exactly what I'm looking at. And I can come back to that chart over and over again. And other people who do astrology can look at that chart too. Now, there's more involved in astrology. I made that very clear in the presentation. If you don't know history, political science, sociology, or psychology, a little bit of economics, trying to do a mundane chart, you're just fooling yourself.
Mhm.
You really are. You're delusional. You may get a few lucky things, but you're not going to be able to say anything specific enough that anyone can hang their hat on. And that is, we have to look at that in terms of occultism as well. Why are people coming to the esoteric path? Well, because they don't like their lives.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have to first get them to be honest with it. So, okay, what is it about your life that you're looking to change? What is it you really want out of this? Because if we can help you understand that better and be honest with yourself and begin to realize some of those, uh, we'll call ego-based or outer or more, I like the word transient, more temporal
Yeah.
goals,
Mhm.
then it's easier to get through those and take more faith and confidence in yourself and what's happening, and then have the big experiences that we think of as spiritual goals or spiritual realizations. Because those spiritual realizations are complex. Even when they have a breakthrough, people don't always process them well. And you process it in relationship to your understanding of self here and now. And it may shatter that, it may just reinforce it. And I think a perfect example is, Saul on the road to Damascus.
Mhm.
We can look at that in a variety of ways. On one way, you can look at it as, look, he had the great realization and now he's a proponent. Or, as some people said, he was a homicidal maniac before that. Now he just became a homicidal maniac for the other guys. Well, maybe not homicidal, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
We have to begin to take more understanding of what goes on in that intermediary range of the personal psychology. And I think that's uh, really difficult and really lacking because the promises of immediate and very quick progress are part of the burnout factor.
Yeah.
And burnout's where you lose people, you lose money, you lose resources, and the whole thing closes down. Done. So
Yeah.
we have to learn how to pace ourselves and fuel ourselves.
Yeah, and it kind of like what I was talking about before with this the new way of approaching things in post modernity, particularly for people my age and younger. Um, we I've seen it a lot, and it is one of the questions I ask people when they first join, the Golden Dawn, and they're in my temple. Why are you here? And we'll go around the room, and I'll hear some very highfalutin kind of answers. And then at the end, I'm like, there's technically no wrong answers, but you don't have to. You don't have to. These answers are not for me. Ultimately, they're for you, and I'm going to keep asking you so that you keep asking yourself, because I know most people get involved with magic. And in certain communities, they're not even trying to lie about it because they want a cure all, and really, like you're talking about the spiritual breakthrough, the spiritual development, actually, it forces you to redress and balance the ledger of life. And so that can be, I think, also when people start to feel a little bit of that heat, that warmth, they'll start projecting on either their teachers or the communities and things like that. And I want to take the time to yeah, encourage anybody that's listening to seriously and honestly sit with yourself and evaluate what it is that you're trying to get out of this. Because the things that are going to quote unquote resonate with you are not going to change you. Right? What's the point of doing, well, how is that supposed to change you if you already know it? If you already feel that way?
Well, you've got to do the things you don't like in order to grow. And this is where having been through a variety of traditional experiences was very, very beneficial. And well, because I learned things, you know. And when I say I learned things, I mean I learned how to organize a meeting. I learned how to keep the checkbook. I learned how to deal with the press. I learned how to you know, realize, oh, you know what? I'm going to go sweep the floor because that's easier than anything else. Now leave me alone if I go do that. You learn things by doing things, and you do things usually in a group with other people, because that's what's going to force you to learn how to get along. But that's part of the sustainability is what is the sustainability of the individual on the path? Let's put it in that framework first. How are organizations and groups set up to keep the individual moving forward? Now, one of the ways we do this is the dog and pony show. And the dog and pony show is a wonderful age-old method, proven time after time again, in which you take the individual through a series of graded steps and give them wonderful names and degrees and tell them that new secrets await. And it's not any different than what happened when martial arts came to the West. Back in the day, they had white belts, black belts, and occasionally some schools might have had a brown, but usually they were just not. It was just one or the other. But, to keep people in, you're going to have a white, brown, then, okay, let's have like purple, orange, green,
Yellow.
stripes, yellows and stripes, all this stuff. And all of this is just a way of keeping you moving forward towards the goal. Dog and pony show. And sometimes in those grades, you might get secrets. I know some of them, there's some pretty interesting stuff, not well known even now. It was pretty cool. But most of the time it wasn't, and that's okay too. But why is it? Why is it that we need to do this to keep people in? What is the way and that we keep folks moving forward on their path? And again, their path and their path within the organization, looking at it as a school that they've come there to learn, not as an end all be all. And of course, I talk about that in my book, Egregores. And some people think I'm against organizations altogether, and I'm not. I'm just saying that we have to be in healthy groups, healthy organizations. That's all.
Yeah.
So individual sustainability, because individuals make sustainable groups.
Mhm.
Sustainable groups make sustainable traditions and orders. And then that goes multi-generational. And
Mhm.
that's what makes for a method that is demonstrably beneficial to individual enlightenment. It comes full circle. We're lacking that. The
Yeah.
circle doesn't complete itself all too often in Western esoteric movements at the present day.
Yeah. And, talking about the multi-generational sort of thing, I'm at a time now, we all are really, where there is a changing of the guard. Truly, truly. The old hats are stepping down and stepping back. The people in their 80s, the people in their 90s. I'm not going to name
Mm-hmm.
anybody in particular, but most of us that are, you know, in like me, you, and people that do this stuff are in the know, are aware of
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. And I do see from a few of them, or I do hear from a few of them, that there is this kind of lament of what happened. Where did how after all these years did we not do enough to, as you say, close that circle? So, I mean, what do you think upcoming leaders should know in IHS, the rigorous training that the teachers have to go through? Do you teach them stuff about this? What do you think the future leaders have to know?
Well, they have to know the material, and a lot of folks don't want to learn the material. That's one thing. They constantly want to be bringing in extraneous ideas, beliefs, and systems into this kind of, giant stew. And I say, you can't do that. There's not enough time. There's not enough effort. Uh, Even if I know the answer to that question, I'm not going to tell you because I want you to focus on this because this is what we do. And if we don't do this, then there's no reason to be here. Name this. So this notion of hyper eclecticism is the word hyper. It's eclecticism on steroids, that you can do everything. No, you can't. You don't have time. You don't have time. It's not going to happen.
Man who chases two rabbits catches neither. I learned that the
Just
hard way.
not. That's it. And you have to learn how to focus. That's the first hard lesson. And then if you're going to run a group, you have to be taught how to run a group because as you know from your Masonic experience, just learning how to memorize a ritual doesn't mean you know how to run a lodge. And I've heard some really hilariously even obscene comments. They were funny too about an organization that bases promotion on memorization of rituals. Now I've seen that in esoteric groups as well, where they're pushing the grades. I have a good friend of mine, you've met him, and we can talk about this at the conference. And he's been in a group for, probably 20 years now. He knows exactly what ritual role he wants to perform. He does it exceptionally well. And they keep pushing him to go through the grades. And he says, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for it. He's a professional. He goes, he loves to come there, does the ritual, does it well, and then he has his own practice at home. Sometimes you're going to just have to accept that.
Yeah.
So how then do you deal with the grade structure? And what I see from what people tell me, because I'm not involved in any, but from what people tell me, particularly in like the Golden Dawn, because you have so many grades,
Yeah.
but also in some of the others. Not so much the AS because they've only got 3 or 4. Not so much in Martinism, but there's some of it there too because they've only got 3. And then everybody's clamoring for the 4th. They all want to be free initiators.
Yep. Everybody.
I got to be that. Then I get to open my own lodge and do it right.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
And
The people who want that are probably the worst candidates for that kind of thing.
well, that's it. Most of the one I've run into are the least qualified to run anything. Being knowledgeable of the material is not the same as being able to run something. And we have to make that clear. We have to help build people's skill sets. So when they're coming in and they're looking at something, so what's your skill set? How's your life going? You have to take a real interest in the candidate in their life. And I got to tell you, if they're not sober, and I mean literally and figuratively most of the time, They shouldn't be there to begin with.
Agreed.
We're too lax on and if they're overweight and they're eating high fructose corn syrup all the time, drinking that, you've got to tell them, you got to stop this. This
Mhm.
is not good for your nervous system. It's not good for your health. It makes it incapable of you to work well at this because you're damaging the vehicle in which everything is going to be used. So, you're out there trying to polish this sports car, but you don't have even good oil or gas in the tank. You're going to ruin the engine, you're going to ruin the transmission, and then you're going to be done.
Mhm.
Or you're going to spend a fortune to get that repaired. So we've got to get realistic with people in terms of health. Now, here at IHS, the folks in the teacher training program are extremely motivated in terms of health and wellness, and they're extremely motivated in terms of learning the material. But even now, and they know it's no secret, I got to take the whip to them every now and then to stay on task, give yourself a deadline, get that paper done, and it's not, get that video done so that we can keep this moving forward because your motivation in terms of goals is
Mhm.
also part of, when do we get there? What does it look like? And then what do we do with it? And then I tell them, remember, and graduation means now you've got to teach. So let me know, well, how do you plan on using this? We're not just training you for the fun of it. Not because I like you. I mean, I like all of you, but not that much. You know, not for this amount of resource investment.
Mhm.
What are you going to now do with it? So we work with them on that. And I've got two people who just want to ask for information to apply to it. And I said, okay, then we're going to wait on that because we're going to cycle the FIS group through and then hopefully we'll figure out a way to integrate some new people. But that's another problem. How do you integrate people into existing groups? All of this is organizational management stuff that the average student, the average member doesn't even think about.
Mhm.
They don't even, it's not even on their game plan because fundamentally they're selfish. That's all right. But,
Right.
but you have to understand you're selfish. You're just here for what you want and then you go home. You treat this like a drive-in at McDonald's.
It's extraction.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to move them away from that. We have to begin to say, okay, we understand that, but that's not the relationship. We have to talk about relationships and developing relationships and what that means, because that's the influence of Netzach. We say it's love, we say it's eros, but it's not just eros. Love is about relationships, harmonious relationships. So when the organizations really collapse on that we see in ceremonial magic, it's because they've married themselves to the pillar of Hood, the pillar of severity. You've got to learn to develop these relationships so that things move more easily, more freely. Now, that's my advice. So developing reflective and strong people, focusing on their personal lives, that is their personal goals, behaviors and patterns, and how that affects their esoteric life, integrating it. Okay. You have to depoliticize it too. That toxic infestation of political correctness and politics has almost destroyed most of the rigor in these organizations.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing, rigor in a healthy way. What is strength? What does strength mean to you? How can you become a stronger person? Not more demanding, not more domineering. How can you be really stronger? Because you've got to work your way up this tree, so to speak, and that takes conscious effort.
Mhm.
And then, of course, skill sets. You can't expect everyone in the lodge to know everything, but they have to learn it at some point if you want them to be in a managerial position, which is part of sustainability. So, what are some videos? What are some programs? What are some educational things they can go to learn how to run an effective group? And that includes the budget and being honest about resources. I think the biggest thing is most of these groups for 30 years, 35 years have simply lied to themselves. I
Mhm.
hear it again and again and again. They lie to themselves about the role of money. They're
Yeah.
horrified to discuss it. Well, guess what? No money, no honey.
Yeah, I mean, you can't set roots at all. I mean, I learned that the hard way too. There's somewhat of a very airy nature or a very idealistic nature, a naivete, even an immaturity, I think, because it's so easy to get involved in this stuff and then escape, cosplay, just escape life with it.
Well, that's because the people involved are children. I mean, the average magic book, the average book on ritual magic was written for a 15-year-old. Now, maybe it's a little older now, maybe it's aimed at a 20-year-old, but I'm serious. I'm telling you as a published author, this is where they were aimed at. So
Mm,
you're aiming books at children essentially and expecting them to act like adults
right.
when you meet them. And um, that generally doesn't happen without a strong guiding hand coming in and saying, okay, this is what really is required of us,
Hmm.
required of us. That includes you.
Right.
And the other part is the notion, again, easy access, and that's going to go away. That's going to go away in the next few years.
Yeah.
The bifurcation's already underway.
Well, how do you
And
mean?
well, just the ease of wealth is evaporating, and
Mm,
this rides on wealth.
true.
People don't get that. This is disposable income. I mean, they don't understand. They never talked to a lama who had to disrobe because, well, he had to make a living after he left Tibet and there was no one to support him, and the temple was destroyed.
Mm,
They never talked to anybody who was in a group in occupied Europe. It's all imaginary crap in their head for the
yeah.
most part. And that came because of safety and wealth.
Mm,
But here is an interesting point. You said it's an archetypal, it's airy fairy, but that's the domain of air. They have these archetypal ideas, but that's the second hay or the first hay. The second hay is earth. And earth tells you whether the first hay is right or not. Yod he vav he. If those archetypes, earth is going to be right all the time. Earth wins over air. Done. And that air part, that earth part is what we need to say. How do we bring it down to earth? Well, guess what? Effort and work. And some of that means suffering. I mean, the paths up to Tiferet, they're all horrible.
oh yeah.
I don't mean that in a terrible way, but just be honest,
Well, I
you
mean,
know?
even Tifereth, it's right. You talked about strength, but the ideal of Tifereth is the strong are those who serve.
Hmm.
So it's a heart-based service,
And
and
survive.
yes, exactly.
And that's the
So
other one, survive to make it to get some of that other juice coming out of the other upper spheres.
mm,
So this then goes down to leadership. What does leadership expect? What does leadership demonstrate? Um, and sometimes leadership can do that in a variety of ways. There's no single way of doing it, but leadership always sets the tone, ever, either lightly or directly or loudly, but they set the tone. So leadership is often afraid of losing members because members are so few.
yeah, it's customer service.
It gets customer service. Yeah. Again, we're telling you what really goes on. This is the reality of it for those listening. So you look at customer service and how can you get people involved and how can you get them to volunteer and at the same time not burn out your volunteers? It's human management, but that's where the growth as a person comes in, not in the ritual circle. The ritual circle is where it's like your wish list for Santa. You're sitting on Santa's knee as a kid, and you say, "Santa, bring me a bicycle." That's the ritual circle. Well, then you go home, and somehow, or maybe not, the bicycle shows up. But maybe in doing so, you've got to actually go do some work for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Initiation ritual is just a catalyst. We're saying we're setting the table and making the odds the best as best as possible that this is going to happen. But at the end of the day, like I can't drag you up the tree of life. You have to do it. You know.
Well, going back to this question, we was asked, what was the great obstacle to enlightenment, the greater human enlightenment? Was it religion or was it politics? The governments. And he said it was indifference.
Mm,
And I see that all the time, indifference. And since the fire out in California where the Theosophical Society burned down and PRS was threatened,
mm,
uh, two Waldorf schools burned. There was the Self-Realization Fellowship's Lakeside Temple was threatened but not damaged. Either was PRS, as far as I know.
Okay.
And there were probably smaller temples out there that we'll never hear about and never know of, except maybe locally, that were damaged or destroyed. And people would say, well, geez, why didn't they digitize everything? And I'm saying, well, I don't know what they did or didn't digitize, but where were you last month with that great idea and a check to make it happen?
Right.
Where were you last year or 10 years ago to make that happen?
Hmm.
And that needs to be the conversation that's had. We understand why you're here and what you want out of this, but what are you giving to others in return?
Yeah. And social media has made it really, really easy to just chime in, ring that bell, check that, that empathy signaling box, and then walk away, go back into your kitchen or, go back to the fridge, go back to the TV. But my question for you is, we talk about the future, we talk about what's coming, we talk about the successes and failures, and I know that you do, um, you've done some predictions, some astrological work, and we can talk about that if you want to, but I'm interested where you think AI, social media, digital sort of interactions. Do you feel like they can play a because they're only going to increase. Do you think that that we can get through this and utilize them in ways that are healthy and sustainable in its esotericism?
No. And I'm adamant about that because the skills required are internal skills. They're skills of the personal mind that are like muscles on the body. Muscles only develop not by staring at a weight, but by lifting it. And the skills needed to undertake the inner journey and sustain the continuity of consciousness, whether it be in a lucid dream or in death or an out-of-body state or death, is not going to be developed by AI. And while certain value may be given to virtual reality, that has more of as a demonstrative example, that would have more of a temporary benefit than long term. Same with most psychedelics. Psychedelics can be a wonderful gateway, a wonderful introduction, but they're not sustainable as the experience. They have limits.
I agree.
And that's something many people just really get upset with me about. I said, well, just the way it is. You want to believe that your journeys in Yesod are so spectacular, but they're not. They're fantasies. They're okay. They're wonderful fantasies. They're great. But there's a lot of other places out there to go. You've gotten on the bus and I don't know, we'll pick someplace that has a nice bus station, maybe. Well, does anybody really have a nice bus station? Remember
Not
going
anymore.
remember the Baltimore bus station back in the day?
Yes,
You,
I do. I
you,
do. I
you,
used to use it.
you couldn't get out of there fast enough, It's like,
Yeah,
nah.
yeah.
Same thing with Port of Authority in New York. Although that has some places are pretty nice in there, I have to tell you.
Yeah. I
They're
mean, Port
pretty good.
Authority was at least entertaining outside.
Yeah, yeah. And some of the cafes in there last year were pretty good too. But you're at the Port of Authority, you're at the bus station, you're at the airport, and you're mistaking it for the rest of the journey.
Yes.
You've got to make the rest of the journey. Now, the same thing is with Hood. They end up mistaking the map for the territory.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we have to have good examples of this. We have to have people who are constantly encouraging and demonstrating the moving forward because the technology is going to make it more difficult, not easier.
Yeah.
And the problem with the technology is people are also getting dumber. And that's demonstrable in terms of IQ. IQ matters. And for anyone who wants to hear more details about this, they can sign up for our course 2025, or excuse me, Pluto and Aquarius 2025 and beyond. There's a 3.5 hour presentation. I thought it was going to be an hour and a half. It was 3.5. And
Bang for your buck, man.
yeah, and it's a detailed forecast and the environment and why it is. Why it is and why it's not deterministic in the sense that it's pessimistic, but it is deterministic in the sense that this is the environment we're going to be existing in. You need to adapt yourself to this environment because this is not going to change unless one of these white swans happen. And if this white swan doesn't happen, again, karma, if then, all this other stuff is going to be in play and you're going to be in trouble.
Mhm.
You're going to be in real trouble for not paying attention. And I think this goes back to, again, astrology is a good choice because one of the reasons this is my last set of predictions is because people don't take it seriously. You're supposed to do astrological predictions to get a sense of the future so you can adapt and make choices, not take it as deterministic fate, some kind of evil unfolding of your karma. Oh, well, what can we do? No, it's so that you can engage with those energies and get a better outcome for yourself and those around you. And it's the same thing with magic. We have to learn how are we using this to engage with these energies to get better outcomes for ourselves and those around us. We have to get dramatically realistic on some levels while at the same time maintaining that openness that is spiritual realization or spiritual awakening. They don't, at some point, they're not that separate, but you have to get to that point where they're not that separate. And that not that separate point is that experience of Tifereth, where everything is harmonized and all those energies are harmonized in that experience.
Mhm.
But that also means those things which are disharmonious or not useful, they're let go too. So you have to be relaxed to let go of things. And that's where most people suffer. They just don't want to let go of. They self-induce suffering by not wanting to let go of what they need to say goodbye to.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see, there's a lot of entrenched sort of just ideologies right now, political, non-political. Again, it's everything is so uh unhealthily rooted, I think, in a lot of ways. But that's why, I mean, even people like me, people my age, people that are doing the stuff I'm doing, we're looking to guys, men and women like you who, I can take you seriously. You know what I'm saying? And it's because there is that air of discipline, that air of no nonsense. Um, and there in that I see an archetype for a way forward. Right? I don't see it in the kind of this monoculture sort of trend that everybody's kind of trying to pull in their own directions and stuff like that. And I see a lot of friction between the different parts of the community, trying to get absorb everyone into their paradigm. And I don't like the combativeness. I understand that there's a part of it that needs to happen. It's just kind of natural, but you know, I don't think that my take is I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that the
No,
constant infighting is sustainable.
no, it's not. And the worst thing is those who remember the famous Golden Dawn Wars of the late 90s and that terrible, terrible waste of resources that incurred. Uh, and of course, then the unfortunate implosion of Amwork 10 years earlier in the early 90s. And of course, we can go to the various Martinist schisms. Um, all of those were just a terrible because you were dealing with people at some point, not always across the board, but at some point, who really should never have been in an esoteric organization, but were let in. And then they were the last man standing because it wasn't understood that you need what the qualities were. And they didn't possess the qualities, they possessed a pulse and a brain. And because of that, they were able to utilize their situation uh, to the detriment of almost everyone around them on some level. And we saw that repeatedly.
Mm.
The that is the role of the devil. That's the devil card. That's banner of the West coming into play. If it's brought into play. If it's not, well, then you've got a problem, you know? Are
Right.
you going to stop that?
Exactly.
And that's the Guard Ye Well the Western Gate.
Mm.
That's the also the role of so many things. But part of it, I think, for me, and I've talked about this at length in some podcasts, is the role of a kind of excessive utopian idealism that has permeated Western esotericism for at least by now 100 years, probably a little earlier, but particularly dominating in the post-war period because the horrors of the first half of the 20th century were so traumatic that the idea of having one world government, one world religion, uh, everyone living in kumbaya harmony was the driving force. And that just permeated so much of the New Age movement, the philosophical milieu, esotericism, Buddhist converts, yoga, you name it, well, any of the new and emerging religions, that kind of utopianism. And uh, that's going to fall apart. That's going to fall away, but you're going to still see more of it in some ways. It's going to bifurcate. It's going to split. You're going to see a splitting. And as money gets tighter, we may get a 4 or 5 year reprieve, depending on what the new administration does. But the debt crisis is going to be crushing, and we'll probably see a pulling apart of globalism sometime after 2030, between 2030 and 35. We're going to see it pulling apart.
Interesting.
So while all of these folks are making comments about Trump online, about the Gulf of America and the Panama Canal and Greenland, what they don't understand is that those are resources and trade routes. And you're going to see the rise of empire because as globalism pulls apart, regional empires are going to dominate because it's going to be about resources. So the cheap technological lifestyle that many have come to take for granted and which are basing their esoteric vision on is it's not going to collapse. You're not going to go back to the 19th century. You're not going to go back to the 1950s even. But you're going to see greater restraint on availability and expense. And you're going to see more haves and have-nots. And the have-nots aren't going to have the technology.
Mm.
It's just that simple. I mean, you can even see it now in the costs of how things have gone up in the last 4 years. So with that comes also a reshoring of industry. Now, why does that matter to us in esotericism? Well, it's all going to be local. So, if you don't have a local group or a local lodge, you don't have sustainability. You don't have continuity.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, many of us, we're like, oh yeah, okay, rolling our eyes. But I look around at the 6 bookshelves that are surrounding me, and how there's a lot of money on those shelves,
Mhm.
and that I very fortunately, um, you know, uh, I had, and I was able to spend on this disposable sort of stuff. And if what you're saying is accurate, then the whole
Okay, this
idea.
is let me tell your listeners who don't get it. Okay, this is what the think tanks in DC get told. Okay, the only people who don't get told this are the people who don't want to listen to it or believe it.
Mm,
This is what the decision makers know is going to happen.
mm,
I can't drive that point home, strong enough. This isn't an if or a maybe. And esotericism, again, because of its desire to be an entertainment field, rather than a serious path, uh, has fractured. And those that stay on the entertainment field, they'll go their own way. But those of you who are serious and want to see a future for yourself and your children and grandchildren, you need to plan out how that's going to happen, how you're going to have these resources available to you in 10, 20 years, 30 years.
Mm,
That's the vision you have to have.
right. Yeah, and I know that actually, probably just last year, didn't you speak at like a think tank? Did you go to the
Yeah.
Arlington Institute, asked you to come and talk about egregores, right?
Yeah, I have that. Well, by the way, if anyone signs up for the presentation I gave on Pluto, I threw up the PDF of the PowerPoint of the presentation I gave at the Arlington Institute too, so they can watch that. But I've talked to other folks, other even well-known institutions and people in them, and I mean, I've written about it, I've talked about it. People just, if you don't know the names, though, it doesn't mean anything to you. It's like, oh, well, but if you know the names, it's like, dude, this is not something to be taken lightly.
Mm,
Um, but again, it's personal choices. If you want your journey to be one in which it's all about you and your life, fine. That's all right. That's cool.
mhm,
Hopefully you'll get what you want out of it. And if you want to look at your relationship, which is again that netsack factor of others, then you have to start building. Because love produces. What is that loving relationship, that fraternal loving relationship? What is the fruit of that? What is the fruit of that tree of knowledge? What is that bringing that you're sharing with others?
mm. Well, I'd like to dovetail off of that, and maybe as we come to the end of our conversation this evening, which I think has been extremely important. It's probably the most important conversation I've had in a year, at least. But what are some ultimately like productive or hopeful notes that you could leave us on?
Really simple. Just sit down with your group and say, where do we want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? What are we leaving for the future? And decide, work that out first. Then you look at how you're going to get there, and then you have to partner. You've got to partner with other groups. You may find that you're going to have mismatches. Okay, like I said, they may have interest but no resources. They may have resources but no interest. You've got to find a way to work with that. You're going to have to find ways to bring two or three groups maybe together in order to establish what you want. And you have to take the relationship seriously. You have to be, this is not speed dating. You've got to spend time with these people. You've got to get to know them. Don't just jump in because they say yes. Get to realize, okay, are they reliable? Are they trustworthy? Let it take a year or so before you sign on the dotted line, because there's no need to rush, you know, and then look at what is of value. One of the things in creating the IHS collection is, when you have limited shelf space, even if it isn't a research institution, which is where it's going, you still have to decide what's of value and what isn't. So there are some things that I would like to have included in that collection, but they're just not going. They just don't need to go. I'd like it if they were there, but I can either put in these unique copies of Martinist rituals or these unique Golden Dawn volumes, or this. So I say, well, I've got to make room for the stuff that matters. So the tertiary things that would really be nice to have,
Mhm.
they have to be left out or left to the side for a while until we can see what's really going on.
Mhm.
And then you have to deal with people who are willing to put in money. If they're not willing to put in money, then you say, well, how are you going to raise it, or what are you going to do? You can only have so many people who are willing to bring the cookies. And then you have to decide this is important to you, and you're going to commit the cash to make it happen.
Mhm.
This is what separates the adults from the children. We all had that one friend, that one friend. And, it was fine when it was in high school. It was even kind of funny when it was in college. The one who would always like kind of sit back when the bill came. Okay. But as an adult, it's not funny anymore. And when people tell me now they don't have it, well, hey, you had money for tattoos. You didn't need those.
Absolutely.
You have money for vaping. You don't need that.
Mhm.
You have money for, should I go down the laundry list? How much booze did you drink last week? Uh, that's where people get upset with me, but I don't care because you're not doing anything for us anyhow. The reality is you've got money for what you want.
Right.
And this is as we head into the future, that's where that bifurcation comes in. You're going to have to make choices. I mean, in England right now, the UK, people are making choices between eating or heating. Do you understand that? Germany as an industrial power is questionable.
Mm.
So to think that here in the United States, I mean, when we finally get the bill for these fires, that's going to have a tremendous impact on the economy. Not just the economy of, Southern California and the entire entertainment industry. That's going to have a staggering impact on a lot of things.
Mhm.
So you have to make, this has to be a serious decision. So then you look at the skills you have and the skills you need to get, and you get them. It's just like anything else. You do it very methodically and you write up a plan. And it can be really simple. You may decide that you have an organization in your neighborhood, in your area, in your region, or you've been able to, and if you want to talk to university libraries, contact me and I'll tell you how to go about it because it's tricky business. It's not a simple matter. Okay. Or your Masonic. Maybe your Masonic lodge is in really good shape. Okay. So you want to talk to their librarian there about setting up donations. And then you guys go through your collection. You decide what's useful and valuable, not just what you want to get rid of, but really meaningful. And you figure out, okay, this is what we can donate. Or you collect and say, you know what? Instead of six of us buying one copy of the same book, we buy six different books. That's how it was done back in the day when these groups originally started their libraries. And then you start to get a sense of what's important. And if you need help on deciding that, I can help you run through it because it's not always clear. Because, by our nature as bibliophiles, we just want to wrap our arms around everything, you know. And then there's digitizing. A lot of things have been digitized, but that's only going to be a partial solution because you still have to access it. So, are there things which are valuable that are not digitized, like local histories? Local history of the lodge, local history of your group, local history of the New Age movement or alternative religious movement, and start working on that. So start thinking locally, think out who your partners could be, and always find someone who has the best presence, best dressed, and the best voice to do the talking and the introductions. And then go slow and be patient, but have a plan. You've got to have a vision of what you're capable of doing. There's your ideal plan, what you'd like to do. We'd like to raise $2.5 million to open up our center and have an annual income of $50,000 a year to keep the lights on in the building warm. Okay, that's your ideal plan. What's plan B and C and D? So you can have your ideal, but then work backwards to what you're capable of. Because you may find you're going to find if you really work at it, there's going to be resource matchup where you didn't expect.
Excellent advice. For anybody that's listening and feels called by the message and called by, the recent fires and the destruction of really, really, really important unpublished works, and you want to help preserve esoteric wisdom with the IHS collection, I've got the link down in the About section of this video on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And Mark is really, really good at sending just the right amount of emails, which I think is an art in and of itself. So sign up for the IHS mailing list because it's just the right amount to the point where I click it every time it comes into my mailbox.
One a week. If you get more than two a week, that's rare.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I get so many emails from these things I subscribe to that I like
I
I don't even
unsubscribe.
yeah, I don't subscribe and I never visit that webpage again. So,
Yeah.
for anybody that wants to get hooked up with IHS and get involved, again, all the links in the comment section. Mark Stavish, thank you so much
Oh,
for coming on the show and laying out your wisdom for us. And it's going to be needed in the years ahead, no doubt.
well, thank you much. And you have promised to do a course for us on Theurgy. We're working on that. And you and Jamie hopefully will be at the IHS conference in June in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, northeastern PA. So I hope to see you then too.
Yes, and to plug my own thing, the 2025 Masonic Symposium
That's
at
right.
Asheville, North Carolina, at the beautiful Asheville Masonic Temple in downtown Asheville. Mark Stavish, you're going to be the keynote presenter. So I'm looking forward to that. That's August 23rd of this year. And it's going to be fantastic. So thank you for agreeing to do that for us.
I got to get writing that now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be great. Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for tonight.